So the year is 1999. I was a much younger man.
As was I.
I was an avid moviegoer, went to the movies as often as I possibly could. I don't think any movie I saw at that time, I'd actually go to the theater to see, you know what I mean? Like I went and saw everything.
That was prime time theater time.
And the people I was hanging out with at the time, we had similar interests, and we caught wind of a movie. And I'll tell you, to be honest, we thought it was a documentary.
I think 99.9% of America did.
And
I know I did.
Yeah. And so the idea was we wanted to go see it because this was going to be footage of actual supernatural activity in the theater. Like this was the proof we'd been waiting for. To say I was sort of disappointed when I found out the truth, when I figured out the truth, which a good friend of mine at the time pointed out, you know, they talked about this on the Sci-Fi Channel. So I should have told you.
Yeah, there's that.
But I really bought into the Blair Witch story, hook, line, and sinker. I thought when I saw this, that this was real. I had never seen a movie filmed this way. I mean, this was filmed by the people, by hand, reacting to things. I'd never seen a found footage movie at the time.
I don't think they had one. I think that's what set this so apart.
There was at least one, and I'll talk about that later. There was at least one, but to compound upon the fact that this movie looked like it was filmed by real people in the moment, you also had what was probably the first truly viral marketing campaign. They wanted you to believe it was real. If you haven't figured out, again, we're talking about the Blair Witch Project, which scared the bejesus out of me when I saw it.
It seemed so real. Hook, line, and sinker.
Yeah, it seemed very, very real. So we're going to tell the Blair Witch story, the good and the bad, because there was, for however much money Blair Witch made, there was some very bad things that happened as well.
From a child born into this world, we are taught what to believe. Closed-minded we become, fearful to be deceived. Still we desire to know what lies beyond that locked door. The art of the storyteller, conjuring tales of legend and lore. History hidden, lost knowledge, things forgotten and the unknown. These are the things that direct us and will set the tone. Welcome, friends, to another episode of Nightmares on the Lost Highway.
So like I do on a lot of our podcasts, being the historian of the group, I wanted to go back and to look at the earliest histories, the possible origin story of the Blair Witch. Now, to start with that, we have the name Blair. Well, the original settlement of Blair, Maryland, seems to have been founded by a General Blair around 1771. Now, he had given a portion of his name, obviously his last name, to a fort that had been established under his leadership. Now, that original fortress was to keep settlers safe from Native American Indians who had taken to raiding and attacking anyone who entered their domain. Hey, imagine that. Why would we attack anybody invading our property and our land? But let's build a fort. We called it Fort Blair. And then through time, that became the small town of Blair. So let's flash forward to a key character in the whole potential story, as Bill has alluded to, the Blair Witch. There's a couple possibilities of origin stories, but one in particular is that of Ellie, as she was later called, born Illish Abigail Kedward. She was born in 1729. Ellie, as she was later called, was an Irish immigrant from Glenengarth, Ireland. Now, later on, she moved to the United States, the Maryland area to be specific, and that tiny town we now know that I described as Blair. Not a whole lot is known about her time in Ireland, exactly when she came to America, why she chose to move to America, but we did find a few tidbits. And again, most of this is just little morsels, little tidbits that you'll find on the internet, a newspaper clipping. So again, not much is known about that time in Ireland, but you can find from a few of these shards that her mother died during childbirth, so she lost her mother really before she ever knew her. Her father was caught up in some type of a rebellion where he was imprisoned and murdered, actually disemboweled while young Ellie was forced to watch. Then it's rumored that the child was raised in her preteen years by a kindly hermit man who is said to have dabbled in the occult and taught her some of those teachings. Now, upon the hermit's death, we're guessing now she's in her 20s, maybe 30s, she found the only way to support herself, and that was to turn to the oldest profession of prostitution. During her years of prostitution, it is said that she had 7 pregnancies, none of which she successfully carried, so losing all 7 of her unborn babies. Now remember that number, 7, because it comes
up a lot in the story.
That comes up in the story, as well as the watching her father disemboweled. Keep that in mind. Yeah, this is going to take some dark turns, folks. Now it is said all of this was just way too much for this woman to mentally handle. She's lost 7 infants. She's lost her mother at childbirth. She watched her dad be murdered in front of her, disemboweled. So she went insane, eventually ending up in an early insane asylum. Now, let me just say, that was not a nice place.
Not in those days.
Not in those days.
They were savage.
It was Dr. Frankenstein's laboratory at best. It was, so I'm sure that did not help her. Now, further on, it was said that she was tortured, which I can believe, with all the scientific studies that they would do on those unfortunate souls. And it is said that she even lost an eye. Some say it was self-inflicted due to vengeance, while others say maybe she lost her eye in a fight or some type of a deal with some of the patients. We believe that would take her to the time frame of in the age of the 40s. We do know by 1784, putting her now around the age of 55, she is in America, and there's a string of strange events in the little town of Blair that would make history. First off, townspeople started noticing and reporting small children were vanishing from the town. However, sometimes only for a few hours, maybe a few days, at the most a week. Whenever the children did return, often they seemed dazed, confused. They had no memory of where they had been nor how they even got back from where they had been. Another thing that seemed odd was when these children returned, they were not in good health, not in good condition. They often appeared very pale, weakened, a physical state. Some had difficulties, as said, with shortness of breath. Even holding utensils while trying to eat, they seemed to have like the shakes. They were so weak. Some were losing clumps of hair, or at least had locks of hair apparently ripped or cut out of their scalps. They often would sit on the edge of their bed or on the front porch and just stare off into the woods, apparently at nothingness. Now, while all these children had at least some of these symptoms, they were all sickly and weakened. There was a few of them that simply didn't make it. Another odd thing was as many as 20 children were said to have been involved over a period of about 2 months, all of them under the age of puberty. Townspeople and local gossip soon started pointing fingers. There's this 55-year-old Ellie Kedford that is said to have had one blind eye. She was unwed and without children. Living by herself, she became a suspicious old hag, or even some called a wood witch. Titles soon became synonymous with Ellie. The strange old woman who lived in a cottage deep in the woods seemed like something right out of an old fairy tale. However, the belief now is that she had made a pact, a league with Lucifer, and used her black magic spells and charms to lure the small children into what is called the Black Hills Forest, where she dwelled. There she would draw blood from the innocent children that she lured in and use that virgin blood for incantations, concoctions, and potions. And as any old storyteller knows, when it comes to witches and their powers, it's the blood of the innocents that seems to be the most potent and powerful for the nefarious acts. Now, many said Ellie would release the young children while still under her charm, so that they would return to her whenever she called, much like in the movie Hocus Pocus, when character Sarah sings the alluring lullaby, "Come Little Children." This did make sense in a twisted way. Why kill the child for a single blood sacrifice when you could just control them and have them return 15 or 20 times to draw blood at your beckoning call? It was the gift that kept on giving. Now, in the winter of 1785, about a year after all the children's disappearances, old Ellie Kedward was banished from ever setting foot in town. The townspeople had had enough. This was after a handful of the abducted children had come together with a story that it was indeed Ellie Kedward, the old hag witch, who had lured them to the dark forest and took blood from them. As if banning and shunning the old woman from ever setting foot in town again wasn't enough, many of the town's officials decided to make an example of her. So with the backing of the local church ministry and out of fear, they raided Ellie's cottage and drug her kicking and screaming out of it. They then blindfolded her, bound her with ropes, and took her deep into the woods in the cold winter. Now some say they tied her to a tree, others said that they tied her to a small two-wheeled cart, but regardless, they left her bound to freeze to death without warmth, without food nor drink. Now, not having the stomach to kill her openly, the officials thought this would be the best idea, and then they would return each evening to check on her, fully expecting to find her frozen to death. However, to their disappointment, even after 3 days and 3 nights, exposed to the harsh winter conditions, old Ellie Kedward was still alive. This just fueled the fires and the rumors, now with people stating that it was her wickedness and her alleged pact with the devil that must surely be keeping her alive. It was also noted that in this portion of the woods and the forest, deep in the woods of Maryland, no matter of wild creature seemed to come to attack or try to feed upon her during this time. Not even common wolves or bears. That was common at the time in that area. So this went on for an entire week, and each evening the town officials would find Ellie still alive, even to the point they said where she mocked them and spit in their face. This was too much for them to handle. They'd had enough. So it was time to take matters further into their own hands. If they could not freeze her to death, they would torture her to death. They cut the ropes and strung the old woman up around the waist and then up to her neck so that it did not kill her by hanging. They tied a sturdy limb across her shoulders, tying her arms outstretched. And on each one of those limbs, each one of her hands and each one of her feet, they tied heavy rocks to weight her down and to pull on her body and her muscles, dangling there from the tree in the winter, leaving her twirling around with the winter breezes, and they thought surely she'll be dead before morning. But even before that time came, as they tied the last stones to her feet, out of nowhere an unexpected snowstorm with lightning that came down upon them as the old woman screamed in agony and fear. The citizens all ran in panic, thinking this certainly must be a spell or curse that the old witch was in the process of casting. As the townspeople ran from this horrific snow and lightning storm, they heard her last words, uttering a curse on everyone that was there that night and within the town for generations to come, and then it was followed by a sinister laugh. After they waited 3 days, they returned, and sure enough, they found the old woman still hanging, frozen solid. They began to dig a grave. However, with the winter, they could only dig it about a foot deep. They decided, fearful that shallow grave would not hold her body, so they changed the plan, and they burned her body in the hole that they dug instead. Then it is said that they had collected her ashes and spread them to the wind all through the forest. That may not have been the best idea, as it would turn out.
It doesn't seem like a great idea.
Not a great idea, because it seems to have cemented Ellie Kedward's curse and released her vile darkness forever within those woods there close to town, essentially binding her spirit to those woods for all of eternity. Now, if you ask the townspeople, they would say they acted in accordance with the will of God, and they rid the world of an evil soul, and did not lose any sleep over it for what they did, or at least for a night or two, because Ellie's curse seemed to work its dark, dastardly deeds with more and more unexplained vanishings, not only of small children, but also adults. The town seemed to be having problems with pure drinking water, as many of the wells seemed to have been tainted, as well as livestock and pets falling suddenly to their deaths. Crops would be infested and wiped out. Some horses and cattle, dogs even began to show violent behaviors and attacking and biting for no reason. All of the officials that were present for her torturing and death that night all reportedly died during this time frame, some of unexplained reasons. Over 25% of all the children in town had vanished, and over 1/3 of all the adults in the town had also vanished. This was enough to frighten the remaining citizens of Blair to flee, literally making it a ghost town for nearly 40 years. Then in 1824, Blair was rediscovered and settled, but losing its former name to help remedy any paranormal fear, it was renamed Burkittsville, which sets the scene of our story tonight for the Blair Witch Project.
Well, things stayed quiet in Burkittsville for quite a while, until the 1940s. Now, somewhere in that time frame before the 40s, I do believe there was a story about some men that were murdered and laid out on a rock in the river.
I can touch on that
Yeah.
a little bit later.
But Rustin Parr became important to the story in the 40s. He had taken up to living in a cabin outside of town, out in the woods. And once again, the children of Burkittsville, once Blair, started to disappear. And I don't remember the time frame, but in the time frame that Rustin Parr was active, he had kidnapped, abducted 7 children from Burkittsville, took them to his house in the woods, and there he tortured and murdered them.
The story there was a little vague, but I did find one article that said he actually got all 7 in one night. So I'm not sure about that.
I don't know that I didn't find anything about the time frame. So now Parr would be overwhelmed with guilt by what he had done and did turn himself into the police. Now, when he turned himself in, part of his confession included that he said the spirit of an 18th century witch named Ellie Kedward had been plaguing him and told him she would leave him alone only if he murdered 7 children from town. And that was the story he stuck to until the day that he died.
Well, I did find some articles on, again, Rustin Parr. When the police went to his cottage, his house, they found disemboweled bodies of the children. They also thought it was strange these were all placed in the basement, almost like in certain corners, like they had been staged.
Well, wasn't it, I believe the story goes, he made one child stand in the corner,
yes,
facing away from the rest, and then he would make the next kid watch him kill that kid.
Yes. I got into one article that I'm still questionable about even touching on. I'm just going to touch on a few things. It was so grotesque. As he disemboweled them, he wrapped the intestines around his neck, almost like he was wearing it. I will stop there because it gets worse.
Yeah, we don't need that.
We don't need that. But when the police found this, these children were like staged in different corners. And to Bill's point, yes, I think he was having at least one child stand in the corner, which is an obvious head nod in the movie to the very last scene where Mike, I think is the character's name, was standing there, and you're like, oh my gosh, what's going on with Mike, and all this. So definitely that was checked.
Yeah.
Now, Rustin went on and he said that this old witch had haunted him in his dreams. They said possibly the man had went for days, maybe even weeks without sleeping. Some townspeople noticed him wandering the forest, the woods nearby, mumbling to himself, having conversations. So I think it's safe to say he had some mental disabilities going on. But as Bill said, he owned up to all of this. He literally walked into town. Now, from what I understood, he did not own a car. He didn't even have a driver's license. So again, it kind of questions, how do you come to town? I'm assuming it was like a mile away. It sounded like it was a distance for his house.
It's quite a ways, I think, from town.
And how do you lure 7 children without a car to follow you back to your house?
That's also why the time frame seems like it had to have happened over a span of, I don't know that he could have done it.
A parade of 7 children going down the road?
Maybe it's a Pied Piper kind of thing. I don't know.
I don't know. That was like really kind of twisted and weird. But he finally came back into town walking and just kept repeating certain words over and over, and it was something to the effect of I'm now almost done, or something, which he said was, Ellie basically releasing him because he had done this. Now, the connection here I definitely wanted to tie back was early reports say that she lost 7 children, that she did not carry to full pregnancy. Here we have 7 children that she allegedly instructed this mentally deranged man to get for her. So that was kind of a interesting tidbit.
So that's sort of the history of this area. Now, the movie, The Blair Witch Project, simply opens with no credits. There's just a title card and some text indicating that the footage was uncovered in an isolated cabin near Burkittsville, Maryland, and is a document of the final days of Heather Donahue, Michael Williams, and Joshua Leonard. Now, the movie starts with these three student filmmakers meeting each other, kind of getting their equipment together, kind of getting to know each other a little bit. I think it was sort of an open call thing where they kind of came together. I believe Heather is the one that's sort of the
head honcho,
leader
of the
leader,
pack.
director, whatever. But she wants to make this documentary about the legend of the Blair Witch. And so they set out in 1994 to make this documentary. They start by traveling to Burkittsville. I think they do a little segment out front of the Welcome to Burkittsville sign. They sort of lay the groundwork for the Blair Witch story.
Visit the local cemetery, interview some of the locals.
Yeah, they go around, they interview some of the locals. They sort of collect some of the story, the history. They learn about Rustin Parr. They go to like one lady, I think, outside of her trailer home, and she says that, oh yeah, I actually saw the Blair Witch out in the woods one day. Scared me, tells the story. But they interview some locals, and all the locals seem pretty willing to talk about it. But they're like, yeah, this is the history. I think one of my favorite parts is there's a lady who's got a baby who's clearly not interested in being part of this, as a baby would.
Right.
But she's trying to tell the story, and the whole time the baby's just kind of doing its own. It's one of those things where it's like, I just liked that in that scene that the baby just doesn't want it.
It made it very believable, for the audience watching it.
So after they learn kind of all this history, they go off and they're going to go into the woods and they're going to find the cabin that Rustin Parr was in, this house out in the woods. So they're heading down some back roads. They're heading towards the Black Hills Forest, which is now the Seneca Creek State Park. Now, as they're driving, they see a couple of guys fishing down on the river, and they go and they interview these two guys, which one of them, if I might, looks like my great uncle, really to a degree that even to this day, when I watch it, I'm like,
what's my uncle doing there?
Guy. Yeah, looks really, really like my. As a matter of fact, I think he's the one that actually tells the story. But yeah, just reminds me of a family member of mine. But they tell this lady, Heather Donahue, that he tells her, like, once I was out here fishing, I was going down the river. There's this big rock in the river, and as I'm going by, I see this mist over it. And so he starts to tell her the story about another 7 people who were afflicted by the curse of the Blair Witch. And I think you have a little more on that.
I do. That would be an 1886 story concerning a 8-year-old little girl named Robin Weaver.
Oh, I said 7.
You did say
5.
7.
It was 5.
Yeah.
I said 7. It was 5. I got stuck on the 7 number. But yeah. But anyway, sorry to interrupt. It was 5, not 7.
In 1886, 8-year-old Robin Weaver, a young girl, wandered into the woods near Burkittsville and got lost. Spoiler alert, she did survive. And because of that, we have a first-hand account from a survivor in this particular tale. Now, Robin stated while she was wandering through the woods, she became lost, but befriended an old woman, in which she described as friendly, but one that her feet never touched the ground, and she seemed to glide on air to never leave a footprint nor leave a sound. The kind old woman said that she had a home not far from here, and suggested that Robin, the little girl, follow her there to maybe get some food and to warm herself. Now, she then said, we can return you to your parents after you get some food in your belly and you get warmed up. Now, the 8-year-old little girl was too naive to say no, and being scared and lost, alone there in the woods, accepted the invitation and followed the levitating woman to what Robin described as a rundown 2-story home with a basement. Now, some parts of the story does say it was a cellar, which would be a detached, either way, a lower compartment. Now, once inside, the old woman said, it appears I must be out of food up here, but I keep some in the basement. So follow me there. Together, they went down, and they did find some food. Robin then said the old woman turned and locked the door to the basement and called to her saying, you're safe here. I've got an errand or two to run. I'll return by nightfall. Robin quickly started crying, perhaps starting to understand her situation had went from bad to worse. She attempted to escape for over 2 hours, unable to unlock the door or to push it open, trying to find tools or anything to be able to break the door to escape. As a last-ditch effort, she moved an old wooden rickety box over to the side of the wall and climbed out, or squeezed out of a broken glass window of the basement. Now, it is believed that the movie The Blair Witch Project used part of this story, again with the basement reference, in the first film, which had the young man standing there in the corner of the basement as we had talked about. But now, back to Robin. She was able to escape through the window with only a few cuts and shards of glass. There was no sign of the woman, so she ran as hard and fast as she could from the old house and quickly came across a creek. Now, luckily, she recognized this creek, and she followed that on into town, where she was able to tell her horrific story. Young Robin Weaver actually lived with her grandmother, and she had returned home at dusk, and there was already quite a big frenzy of people at the house. Robin's grandmother had alerted the local police, and a search party of what I can tell seemed to be 4, 5, maybe as many as 6, which was kind of what Bill was alluding to, as many as 7. It's a little sketchy, had went out into the woods as a search party looking for Robin. But now here, Robin had returned. They had not. They had sent a second search party out to find the first ones. And what they found was bloody, disemboweled bodies of the former men from the first search party on this gigantic, kind of a large boulder rock.
Stone slab kind of thing?
Yeah. It was a big area, one big
flat rock in the middle of the river, basically. They called it Coffin Rock.
I was going to say, which now affectionately has been called Coffin Rock.
Yeah, they were found ritually slaughtered, laid out, I think, like head to toe or like arm and arm.
Their
or
legs
something.
and arms were crossed, almost kind of forming a pentagram-looking star or something. Now, the second search party, when they came across this, was right at dusk, again, right about the same time that Robin would have made it home. And a couple of them supposedly went on record and said they felt like the woods had eyes. They were being watched. The hair on the back of their neck stood up. They felt an evil that they had never sensed before. 2 of them actually said they kind of broke up and ran different directions, but 2 of them said a ghost-like apparition of a woman who leapt down out of the trees, was scratching their faces, tore off their hat, pulling their hair, and this, maniacal laughing like of a witch. Now, from what I understood, of what I could tell, all of those members of the search party did make it out. They returned the next day, obviously under sunrise, and hopefully without the apparition. All the bodies were gone.
Yeah, they never recovered them.
I did see where blood was still stained on the rock, but no signs whatsoever. So they assumed the apparition, the witch, somebody had drugged the bodies off. So that goes back to what Bill was talking about.
So armed with all this backstory, these 3 student filmmakers do what any intrepid college student would do, and they decide it's going to be best if they go into the woods, go find this house, investigate it, document it thoroughly, no matter how long it takes.
Bill, this is you and I. You know we would do this. Oh, come on. Don't leave me hanging.
I've essentially done versions of this.
Yeah. I'm going to say, it's like this would be us.
I have absolutely tromped into the woods to go find places that were supposedly abandoned and haunted.
You say a haunted, creepy cabin? Please draw me a map. Show me the directions.
I'm closing in on 47. And if somebody told me, hey, I know this spooky haunted cabin in the middle of the woods, I'd call you and my brother and sister probably. And
let's do this. Then I have flashbacks of a video I saw on Facebook called Grandparent Racing. I don't know if you saw that. Yeah, that would be me because I'm the oldest of the group. It's like the Kentucky Derby, where they have all the metal doors that open on all the horses. All the grandparents like race out running and they have like Charlie horses in their legs and they fall and they tumble and one trips another one. And
whatever happens, I'm going to have to stand my ground simply because running doesn't feel like an option.
Yeah.
I'm not being brave. I'm just old and my knees don't work as well as they used to. I had that conversation with somebody the other day. They never tell you, getting old is supposed to bring wisdom and experience and whatnot.
Ugh.
But I said, when you're young, you feel terrible, you go to bed, you wake up, you feel better. When you're old, you go to bed feeling fine, you wake up feeling like garbage.
Horrible. Yeah.
So anyway, they head off into the woods. I think the idea was to spend maybe one night or not even a full night. Like they were supposed to find the cabin, leave the woods. That was going to be it. So they go out and they just have no luck finding the cabin. And what was supposed to be a short, quick little trip turned into multiple days spent lost in the woods.
Yeah, I was going to say, they actually got lost themselves. Yeah. Now, they had some tents and stuff. They had
brought
camp.
Some
they
stuff.
Had some shelter.
I assume, they probably intended to stay at least one night. But they had tents and some supplies with them. The first day is kind of fairly uneventful. But as things progress, they begin to experience weird things. I think they find some stacked stone cairns, if you will.
The sticks hanging from the trees. I think maybe it was day 2 or something.
The next day. Now, And at night, they begin to hear weird sounds and things that kind of spook them in their sleep. Now, as their anxiety increases, their exhaustion increases, they begin to fight with each other.
Not getting much sleep.
Heather seems intent on filming everything. The other two guys, they're
We're ready to go home.
Look, we need to get out of the woods. My family's going to want me, They start running low on food. They're still can't get out of the woods. They only brought enough food for a couple days.
I think things start disappearing too, like some of their food reserves.
They lose them.
And so now they're accusing the other one of,
you ate too
much
start
food,
fighting with each other.
The flashlight's now gone.
I think at one point in time, they have a big argument over the map, and it turns out Michael threw the map away in the river because, hey, the map wasn't doing us any dang good anyway.
Yeah, yep.
Finally, things, as if this all wasn't bad enough, not their last night in the woods, but the next to the last night in the woods, their tent is attacked in the night by unseen forces. There's weird sounds coming out of the woods. The tent's being shook. There's clearly something out there. They run out basically to see what's going on and maybe potentially record whatever it is. And in the course of them running around, Josh disappears.
The first of the three vanishes.
The next day, Heather and Michael are trying to process what happened. They find a little bundle outside their tent, and it's a scrap of fabric from Josh's shirt, and it's covered in blood, and inside is some of his hair and apparently some of his teeth. So whatever has happened, something bad has happened.
We bring you a gift.
I don't even think they go anywhere that night. I think they stay there and just try to waiting for him. They don't know where to go.
Yeah, they're totally lost.
That night, things are even worse, and they take off fleeing into the woods, Michael and Heather. They get separated.
At dark.
Heather is filming at this point for some reason, still, I guess just trying to document everything, and comes across a 2-story dilapidated house.
And here's some of the
hear,
history.
She can hear Michael yelling from the inside, and this is where the movie does come to its sudden and infamous end. Heather goes into the home. She can hear Michael screaming. She goes downstairs into the basement, cellar, whatever, and there she films. She's filming. You can see Michael with his back to the camera, nose in the corner, and she calls out for him. She starts to approach him. When she is struck, apparently from behind, she's knocked down. The camera continues to run for a little while.
Kind of hits the ground, angled view. And for anybody out there who hasn't saw this movie, one, I strongly suggest you watch it if you're into horror stuff at all. But two, the way in which it is recorded for that a special scene.
Yeah.
The camera is shaking. I mean, as she's running, going up and down the steps, there's like a fog that kind of fogs up part of the lens.
Yeah.
It's dark. So, I mean, the camera, she's got, I guess, some type of a night vision, but it is extremely hard to see. It just sets it off perfectly.
Now, the movie ends.
Abruptly.
I don't even remember what's in the credits, if there's credits, for that matter. Especially back in that day, you didn't sit through the credits because it wasn't a Marvel movie and they didn't have anything at the end.
And it's been a number of years since I saw it, but I think maybe some of the wanted posters for The Missing 3.
I think you're right. I think that might have been part of that.
Closing credit, maybe?
Now, we've told this story, and there's a lot of detail there. And, I mean, it could be any of our other episodes talking about a haunted house, a haunted woods, strange stories. We've covered a lot of weird stuff, and it sounds so very reminiscent of other stories we've told.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact is, nothing in the Blair Witch was real.
All fabricated.
It was written and directed by Daniel Myrick and Eduardo Sanchez, popularized the found footage style. But basically, there was this huge viral marketing push. They created a website. There were posters with the actors' faces on it, saying they were missing. Someone went in and edited their IMDb profiles to say they had died.
They were deceased.
Turns out was actually the film company, which seems like it should be illegal.
If you're an actor, chances are you're not going to get another role if you're deceased. Yeah. So,
No.
I mean, that really kind of tipped the tables.
It was so bad, casting directors never even thought to contact them because they knew they were dead.
Yeah, we can't get them. They're dead.
Now, again, the marketing for this movie started 6 months before they even began filming the movie. And again, this was the early days of the internet, mind you. Everybody's so used to the internet.
Oh, yeah.
And it's everywhere.
Yeah.
This was the early days of the internet. And if you saw something on the internet, you believed it. And when you saw the documentary, which they had an hour-long documentary on the Sci-Fi Channel
about the movie,
Yeah, it detailed the history.
The documentary.
It detailed the history of Burkittsville. It talked about Blair. A lot of the stuff Eric touched on was included in that. I watched that, and a friend of mine at the time, it was on the Sci-Fi Channel, man. Seriously? And I was like, but at that point in time, Sci-Fi Channel had shows about like mysteries of the unexplained type stuff. So I was like, well, why wouldn't they?
Well, and later, Sci-Fi had taps and all that.
Ghost hunters and all that.
So, I mean, yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, why wouldn't I have thought to believe some of that at least?
It was a different time.
But
I did think it was so weird that in the movie, the three actors, I think you pronounce Heather's name Rhea?
She's changed it since then. I don't remember. I saw a reference to it.
Yeah, R-E-I.
Yeah, I don't remember what it is now.
But then the other two, Joshua Leonard actually played Josh. Played Josh.
Well, at the time, Heather's name was Heather. She's changed it.
Okay.
So they were all going by
Mike
their actual
played
names.
Mike.
Yeah.
I mean, so then that caused confusion even with some of the distant family thinking that they had truly died.
Heather's mom was getting messages of condolence from people who knew Heather. Like, oh, I'm sorry to hear about your daughter. And her mom was just like, what are you talking about? Like on a regular basis. When Heather attended her high school reunion after the movie, people were shocked that she walked in the door. They thought she was dead.
Yeah.
I mean, and that was the point. The marketing of this movie was so good and so intense in a way that honestly you probably have never seen before or since.
Well, and it launched so many other movies filmed in that aspect, you know.
Well, you have Paranormal Activity that came after it, yeah. And again, I think I want to talk about some of that stuff later on. But yeah, I mean, you had the special on Sci-Fi, you had the wanted poster. Even when the film debuted at Sundance, they handed out wanted posters to the people, or not wanted, missing posters
missing
to the
persons.
people walking in to say, oh, these people are gone. And again, it's just so crazy what happened. Again, because of the marketing of the film, I think the original budget was $60,000. And half of that was credit card advances.
I heard 35,000 was mentioned in several articles, and others was 60,000.
Well, I think the 35 might be actual cash they had. The other, I think, because I think what I read was almost half of it was cash advances on credit cards.
Oh, okay.
So I think they might have had like actual financing for like 35. And then the film ended up making over like $250 million.
Yes.
It sold. The rights to the distribution sold for $1.1 million. I mean, they made a ton of money, but again, it sounds like a runaway success story. But for all the good of the Blair Witch, that there was some bad. There was definitely some bad. Part of it, even from the beginning, to accomplish what they wanted, there was a 35-page outline of what the movie was going to be. No dialogue.
No scripts whatsoever.
So when you were looking for actors, they needed people that were good at improvising, quick on their feet. And so they literally put this notice in the paper. Attention, casting, improvisational feature film. HFP is holding an open call for the Black Hills Project. Non-union, with pay, travel, and meals. Shooting October-November for 3 weeks in Maryland. Seeking women and men 18 to 25 with natural look. Extremely challenging roles, all in capital letters.
No
to
kidding.
Be shot under very difficult conditions. These actors were expected to, again, operate the cameras because it was all handheld footage.
Yeah, there's no film crew following you, documenting you.
When they took the role, they were told by the filmmakers, quote, "Your safety is our primary concern, but your comfort is not."
Yeah, they were told they were going to be going
under
into
rough
this.
circumstances. They fed them, but they fed them progressively smaller meals every day. I think Heather even said maybe they didn't even get a meal the last day of shooting. And so that ratcheted up their anger.
I had read part of, to set the mindset for the people, the actors, and to make it as real as possible, there was no other physical intervention with any other person besides the three of them. Meaning, like on the map, they might say, go here. You would pick up their food supplies, whatever they would have.
They were given like waypoints,
they
and
might
then
have
there were cards left behind.
A card or an envelope. This is, today, Bill, you're going to wake up angry.
Well,
or whatever.
And each one of them might receive cards that were counter to each other.
Yes.
It might be like, okay, Heather, you're in the lead and you're going to get everything back on track. And then one of the other, like Michael's card might be like, Heather's wrong no matter what she says and you're in charge. And,
Oh, and by the way, make sure a flashlight disappears and you take 2 apples or whatever out of the food. And so literally they said when they were interviewing, especially Heather later on, she said we would wake up and we would have less and less food every day. So the fear of running out of food, being hungry, being cold was real.
Yeah.
The dumbfounded looks that you see on some of their faces, to Bill's point, was like some of these cards. They didn't have much to go on, a sentence or whatever. And they're like, well, he's doing something totally opposite than what I was told to do. How are we supposed to react? And it's all on the fly.
Yeah,
so,
they weren't given a script. So, I mean, this was all, and they felt, at the time, they felt like they were like rock star filmmakers. They were doing something new and crazy. It was like punk rock filmmaking. And honestly, it was. I mean, I don't know.
Oh, it was cutting
edge. At the
edge.
time, Blair Witch was one of my favorite scary movies. I loved it. Now, we said the movie went on to make like $250 million. The filmmakers sold it for 1.1. When they filmed it, they were only making $500 a week for a shoot that lasted only 8 days. So I'm assuming maybe $550, $600.
Yeah, it wasn't a lot of money by far. And then this thing turns into this blockbuster success. And they don't get any more money.
One of the most successful, I think when it was made, it was listed as the most successful independent film of all time. And meanwhile, the 3 stars of the movie were struggling to make ends meet.
Couldn't even pay rent, they said.
And in the process of promoting the movie, even Artisan told the actors, like, we're spending so much money to promote this movie, you might end up owing us money. Because they didn't know if it was going to be successful or not. The stories that blew my mind, get this. Heather was working a temp job and driving an 84 Toyota Celica that broke down under a billboard with her face on it. Michael was working as a furniture mover, and his agent was like, what are you doing, man? You're on the cover of Newsweek. Joshua served food to his own agent working as a caterer days before appearing on The Tonight Show.
Talk about a slap in the face.
Yeah. They were all starving, basically. I mean, struggling to make ends meet, and in the biggest movie of the time. They were forbidden from participating in publicity. They were some of them even got in trouble for taking other jobs because the idea was, no, you're dead.
You're dead.
You're not an actor. You're dead. You don't exist. Now they suffered through all this believing, okay, as big as this movie's getting, we're going to make some money. When the film broke $100 million, Artisan sent them each a fruit basket.
Oh, that's nice.
A few months after the movie was released and they knew it was going to be a huge success, they got what was called a performance bump. The exact value was not given, but low 5 figures is what it said. So a year's worth of pay, give or take. And meanwhile, Lionsgate at this point, I guess Lionsgate bought Artisan. They were making money.
Making bank.
They were using the actors' names and faces and all that.
They went on and they did a Blair Witch 2.
They did a Blair Witch sequel.
Which I don't think...
Book of Shadows, which was bad.
Yeah, kind of a flop.
And then they did the 2016, I don't want to call it wasn't a reboot, but it was like Heather's brother went back looking for Heather.
Next Generation.
And it was shot, found footage style again. Their original contracts stated they were entitled to 1% participation in profits of anything in excess of $1 million, which they did not see. Now, just before the release of the Blair Witch 2, they did sue Artisan, and after 3 years, they received a settlement worth about $300,000 each that would be paid out to each of them over several years.
Over the next 150 years, we're going to pay this out.
By comparison, the New York Times reported that the film company had easily made $35 to $40 million from the movie at this point. So they had made, they were still making huge money off of it. So recently, Lionsgate announced they were going to reboot the Blair Witch Project.
Total reboot.
The original actors were shocked as much as anyone, and also the original filmmakers, since none of them had been contacted in any way to be involved in this. Their likeness is used, any of the original work. I mean, it was just like, hey, we're starting from scratch. Screw you guys. We're taking over. Now, that did not sit well with Heather, Mike, and Josh. They felt they were being left out of something that they essentially created, which for all intents and purposes,
they did.
They were all key in creating this story. So they wrote an open letter to Lionsgate requesting that they have meaningful consultation on any projects which would likely result in the use of their names and faces, as well as requesting retroactive and future residuals from the profits of the film, equivalent to what they would have received had they had proper representation when they made the movie. They have used their experience as sort of a warning to other up-and-coming actors and filmmakers, like, Make sure you get those things signed on the dotted line. Get your share. Now, before we get to headlines, I don't know if you have anything, but I just wanted to touch. There have been other found footage horror films. You said you weren't sure that you thought this might be the first.
I thought it was. Yeah.
Cannibal Holocaust.
I remember you actually mentioning
made back in the 70s. The director actually landed himself in court when they thought he had actually murdered the cast. He had to bring them out to prove they weren't dead.
What time frame was that?
Late 70s.
Okay.
Unfortunately, there was other controversy surrounding that movie because all scenes of animals being murdered in that movie are legit. They actually filmed themselves murdering these animals.
PETA had a coronary.
And then, of course, you said, going forward, you have the Paranormal Activity series, which, they flat out admitted, like, oh, if it wasn't for the Blair Witch, we'd have never done this. And later on, when we get to questions, I'm going to touch a little bit on my reaction to some of this stuff.
Another thing I wanted to throw in is, again, going back to how realistic they tried to make this appear, which they did a darn good job. There was even some questionable lawsuits because when this came out that these three alleged is the proper word, actors have disappeared or people have disappeared, they involved the sheriff, police, and highway patrol to come do searches.
Wow.
I mean, I don't know how many laws that's treading on, but for the movie company to know it's totally fraud, hey, we need you guys down here. And they had like 150 people in the woods for 4 days.
That's got to be illegal in some capacity.
But I mean, again, that just nailed this down of, how realistic. This is real, folks. This is not just a Hollywood movie, and pulled the wool over all of our eyes, obviously.
Well, are we ready for headlines? Well, my headline is from creepycatalog.com by Chrissy Stockton, dated June 27, 2024. Fascinating facts about the Blair Witch Project. Now, that's not the original title. The original title was 41. I trimmed that list down dramatically because we don't have time for 41. And we'd already covered quite a few, so I knocked it down to 10. Number 1, filming only took 8 days. Editing took 8 months. I think the original cut of the film was over 2 hours. They brought it down to like 90 minutes. 2, in scenes where the 3 leads were interviewing townspeople about the legend, they were under the impression that they were real townspeople. So even for them, the lines were blurred because those were paid actors. They thought they were interviewing actual people and learning about the legend.
So the interviewer thought it was legit.
Yeah.
The interviewee was staged.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Number 3, the sign welcoming visitors to Burkittsville that's seen at the movie's beginning has been stolen 3 times, including the night of the film's release.
Wow.
Number 4, because she was apprehensive about having to sleep in the woods with 2 men for days on end, Heather Donahue allegedly brought a knife with her, which I don't blame her.
No.
She didn't know those guys. Number 5, because the film caused fans from coast to coast to venture into the woods hoping to film their own found footage horror movies, forest wildlife was scared into hiding, and the 1999 to 2000 hunting season was one of the worst on record. Number 6.
That'll upset the natives.
Yeah. Oh, no kid. Number 6. The creators originally intended the film to be about 3 male filmmakers who were lost in the woods, but directors Eduardo Sanchez and Daniel Myrick were so blown away by Heather Donahue's audition that they decided to make her the lead filmmaker and cast Michael and Joshua as her assistant.
She definitely, I think, did a great job. I will say, I don't know how many more nasal passage shots we could have gotten from her with the angle of the camera shooting directly up her nose.
One of the things I read said that she was absolutely unafraid to ugly cry on camera, and that's one of the worst. She
nailed it. Oh my gosh, yeah.
Number 7, around 45 minutes into the film when Heather screams, "What the F is that?" she was responding to the sight of art director Ricardo Moreno, who, as a prank, was running alongside them clad in white stockings with white pantyhose pulled over his head. I'd freak out a little. Number 8, to save even more money, the producers returned one of the video cameras they bought at Circuit City and got a refund.
Oh my gosh.
The camera that Josh used was sold on eBay for $10,000.
And I bet Josh didn't get that.
Probably not. Number 9, the F word is used a staggering 154 times in the Blair Witch Project.
Which was a big thing again at that time frame. Not so much today.
I think
it's almost
when it was
expected.
made, it had like the most uses of the F word, and people were that bothered more people than the fact that it might be real.
Yes.
Number 10, and my favorite. Stephen King's son showed him the Blair Witch Project while he was in the hospital. King asked him to turn it off halfway because it was too scary. In King's own words, halfway through it, I said, turn it off. It's too freaky. I just can't.
That says a lot.
I mean, if you can scare Stephen King, I think that's something.
Before I get into my headline, one of the other things, going back to the filming, the night that they had set up the camp, the night that I think it was Josh disappeared, they had film crew that they sent in without the actors knowing. They were the ones beating on the tents and beating sticks together and throwing stuff and stealing stuff.
If I remember correctly, one of them was like ex-special forces, and that was like his deal was sneaking into places and then, getting you. So
yeah. Well, my headline, Bill actually already talked upon bits and pieces, but I took this headline out of Variety magazine. It was actually June 12th, 2024. And it was titled Blair Witch Project. Actors called out reprehensible behavior after missing out on profits for decades. Don't do what we did.
Yeah, I added that to my story.
Yeah, that's all right, Bill. We'll forgive you. But briefly, I mean, Bill touched place on some of this. Heather Donahue, Michael Williams, Josh Leonard, all trapped in this strange sort of this limbo after this Blair Witch Project. Some said they had signed contracts stating that they absolutely would not do any filming for like a period of 1 to 2 years. That was a little sketchy as they were hungry, not being able to pay rent. A few of them did pick up some magazine expose, some small stuff, some small newspapers.
Heather grows medicinal marijuana now.
Wow.
Because she couldn't make it as an actress because of what happened with all this.
I totally believe it. As we talked about at the Sundance Film Festival, of course, this debut just exploded on the screen. Became one of the most influential horror movies of the past 25 years, and all on here it says $35,000 budget, but as we talked about, that kind of varies, $35,000 to $60,000. I loved the fact, Bill already touched upon it, that Heather was driving her old beat-up jalopy car, and it died right by a billboard, where she looked up and saw her face. Probably one of those nasal passage shots that was infamous for the Blair Witch Project, looking up at it. Again, you had mentioned about the one gentleman working for a furniture company up in Westchester, New York, and his agent was like, "Man, you're on the cover of Newsweek. What the hell are you doing?" The other one was right before he was going to go on the Tonight Show. They got the raw end of the deal of this. Yeah. I mean, entirely.
Well, when you think of their part in creating the movie, I mean, they were just as important as the directors, the writers, everybody.
Every bit of it, if not more.
Their dialogue was improvised. I mean, they were essentially writing it as they went.
Writing the script as they went. Now, the article went on and on. It was actually several pages, and I won't bore you with all the details, but some of the other key points in closing. In April of 2003, Lionsgate acquired Artisan, the small company who owned the rights to the Blair Witch Project. The original cast had been invited to a few of the 25th anniversary conventions, and the actors finally kind of smiled, and they thought, wow, maybe we can actually make a little bit of money off this thing that we did 25 years ago, and it would be nice to get out to meet and greet the fans. But Lionsgate revealed at the movie convention that they had plans for the total reboot of the original film. Many people behind the scenes said this was a ploy to separate those three who were already becoming unruly and wanting their part of their money.
Wanting their fair share. How dare they? We're
going to snip this umbilical cord. And so that bitterness kind of crashed down around them. They said they were all three in a hotel one night in the lobby talking because they had the convention the next day. And they're like, well, I guess they pulled the rug out from us. Once again, they're going to cast a whole new cast and basically try to write us out of it like we never existed.
Well, for probably the second time in recent memory, I believe Eric and I sort of settled on the same question here at the end.
Few different wordings, but it's essentially the same thing.
So my version was, what was your experience with the Blair Witch Project when it came out?
And I will say my question was to Bill on the whole Blair Witch, was any of it real or was it all fabricated? What was your thoughts at the time?
Kind of very similar. So,
well, as far as Bill's question, I did go to the theater and saw it as well. to me, this had so much hype that it was like, I'm not going to wait for this to come out on VHS.
Yeah.
Months later, I want to witness this. I remember here in Lebanon where we saw it, the theater actually was quite, I won't say packed, but it was full.
Yeah.
And I think we even went on a earlier showtime thinking, well, my gosh, if we go on a Friday night at 7, we're not going to get tickets or whatever. Fell for it hook, line, and sinker. Absolutely. I was crushed. I think it was within a month afterwards, and I still don't know how this happened, and my timing might be off. About a month is what I was thinking. After the film came out, I was at our local Walmart, walking down the magazine aisle, and a person that I worked with at the time, I noticed over there looking at the magazine, so I stopped to talk, and they pulled up a magazine, and I don't remember what it was, but it was like a Newsweek, or it was a well-published magazine, and it said the real story behind the Blair Witch. Where are they now? Up to that point, literally, I'm like, what do you mean, where are they now?
Yeah, they're all dead.
You mean their bodies? And they're, this individual, this guy, he was like, man, did you get a load of this? I guess that was all just a crock, beep, kind of stuff. And I'm like, are you kidding me? And we looked at the magazine together there in the Walmart aisle. And I remember leaving. It's like, wow.
Yeah.
I just got played.
Yep.
That's my answer to your question.
We went and saw, there was a big bunch of us. I think there were 6, 7 or whatever. However many people you could fit in a car. Again, I was a little younger than you, but I think, I would have been 20 something when it came out. Yeah, early 20s. And we went to the theater there in Waynesville, and it was still pretty full. I won't say it was packed, but it was pretty full. And we watched it, and we walked out of there, and we just couldn't believe it. I mean, this was all the stuff that we were talking to each other about since we were little kids reading books about Bigfoot and, hauntings here and there, poltergeist and the Amityville horror. Like we were just like, I can't believe that
it's finally here. Yeah.
This is the proof. And I had one of my friends, his name was Joe. Still talk to him from time to time. I think he listens to the podcast every now and then. I don't know if he still does.
Shout out Joe.
Joe was just like, it's all crap. You guys know that, right? It's just a movie. We're like, yeah, it's a movie, but you know what a documentary is. It's a movie, but it's a movie about a thing that really happened.
It's real, man.
To put it in a way that's almost kind of weird. Like I remember that night, I had fallen asleep on the couch watching TV, and I woke up with my face in the corner of the couch.
You were standing in the corner of the basement.
But yeah, I woke up with my face in the corner of the couch and scared myself because my face was in the corner. Like, that's spooky. Like, and then, as time went on, yeah, like I said, there was another friend of mine who was, that documentary was on the Sci-Fi Channel. That's not real. And eventually I saw that they were actors and whatnot. And I probably saw it on the internet or something, but I realized that they were not actually dead and the Blair Witch was not real. But I pre-ordered the VHS when it came. Like I ordered it. It came with a white T-shirt with the missing poster on it.
Wow.
And
you did go all out.
I think I watched it with my kids not too long ago.
That T-shirt's probably worth a little bit today.
I don't. Yeah, I wish I still had it. My kids just don't go for it. Now I will say, let's jump ahead a few years. The Paranormal Activity.
My daughter loved that.
Me and a bunch of friends, we were doing some roofing work on my house, and there was a plane in Springfield because it was another one of those limited release movies, and it wasn't going to be any. We real quick got done doing this work on the house, and once it got dark, we all piled in a car and sped off to Springfield so we could watch because we're like, this movie's going to be crazy. And to be fair, I didn't walk into Paranormal Activity thinking it was real.
Yeah,
I knew it was a movie.
Yeah.
Again, different friend, but we're there and we walk out and me and there were 3 of us and 2 of us were just all about it. Like, oh, it was really good and blah, blah, blah. The other guy was just like, that was dumb. Like, why? And he goes, nothing happened. A bunch of noises and stuff. And I was like, no, you have to watch a movie like this and you have to shut off your brain and you have to watch it with that suspension of disbelief. You have to watch this movie thinking, my God, this is real.
Yeah. If that was you right there and you heard
if you
a
were
noise.
in that position.
Yeah.
And so we watched it and he kind of shot it down. But, I really like the Paranormal Activity. The first one. I think the more of them they make, they just keep copying the same thing. But I will say one of the funniest stories that I have from all that is I was a night shift person. So after the showing got out, everybody went home. I'm sitting at the house. I'm on the computer. I'm messing around, doing whatever I'm doing. And on the other side of the wall from where I'm sitting is my kid's bedroom. And their bed is on that wall. And at some point, one of them must have rolled over and hit their elbow against the wall. I've just watched this movie about a haunted house with like thumps and bumps and whatnot. I came out of my skin, Eric. I jumped so violently. So it startled me. And then with all that in my head, yeah, it followed me home. So I knew it wasn't real, but I believed it. Now, Blair Witch, I just 100% was like, this really happened.
Right there.
And again, it was that marketing campaign, which you couldn't do that today. I don't think you'd get away with it.
Not with the internet and stuff the way it is. They would leak out. And I mean, yeah, it was the perfect timing for the perfect idea.
Yeah, you couldn't do that.
It was just perfect.
Yeah.
So in kind of wrapping up, like we've said, all of this, all the history that I told you was truly fabricated at the time of the movie or around the time of the movie, just to add credence to it. It's very believable. Even to this day, if you went in trying to research this and you did not know that was just a stage deal, you would, I challenge you, you would fall for it hook, line, and sinker.
Well, even the website, they made a website specifically for the movie with the impression that these events had happened. And the website was so janky even back then that it was like, oh, this was absolutely made by people who aren't professionals. Like this is a homemade website right here.
Yep. But as I've said before, with many of the strange lores and legends and tales, often there's a pinch of truth to these stories. But as they're passed on through the years, they're elaborated. But seriously, you mentioned, this sounded like something that's very believable, something that has occurred. How many towns dotted across the United States has a similar story of some poor old woman, hag, that lives in a house or a cabin on the outskirts of town that gets ridiculed and labeled as she's a witch, she's a witch.
Let's go back to our last Halloween special. The story from up northern Missouri of the guy who went out looking for the haunted cabin and was trapped there overnight with the fiends of hell.
Yep. Clawing at the doors.
I mean, it's because the little girl met a witch in the woods and she taught her magic, and
it's impregnated in our mind and our memories. So I think, again, that is what helped this. This wasn't so elaborate that it was unbelievable. It was everything, every town of a horror story starts with. That little spark.
It just made so much sense.
But here's the devil's advocate. If you believe in one, do you believe in 2 and 3 and 100? And where do you stop? And, what's real and what's not? And we're in a day and an age, let's face it, folks, on the internet, you're going to probably find at least 75% false stuff on the internet compared to 25% might be partial reality. It's getting harder and harder to distinguish. But I'm just going to close and say, I guess my thought is simply, there's usually a pinch of truth with every legend and story, but it does usually get inflated more and more as the time goes on. But that's what Bill and I do here on Nightmares on the Lost Highway. We share these tales with you. We hope that you've enjoyed tonight. Thank you so much for listening.
Hey, real quick, call to action. I think Eric would agree. We'd like to grow this Nightmares on the Lost Highway.
Absolutely.
If you could, if you're listening on Apple, if you would go and give us a review and rate us. If you have some feedback, that's fine too. Whatever platform you're listening, follow us, rate us, give us some reviews. That helps get some recognition and gets our name out there.
We do have a Facebook page, Nightmares on the Lost Highway. You can easily find us if you want to communicate with us. If you want to share some possibilities for future podcasts with us, reach out. We want to talk with you guys.
My question is going to be how you reacted personally to the Blair Witch when you saw it and all that. So if you were going to talk about like, oh, I totally believed it was real and because blah, 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 like I want to save that for the question.
My question is, so Bill, what's your take on the Blair Witch? Well, was it real or was it fabricated?
We did it again. I have the same question. So, all right.
All right. So you want me to start in some of the fabricated history? Now, off the record, I'm going to portray this as like legitimate, real. And then in the end, we're going to say,
well, no, because
did they come up with the history after the movie? Or
they did some really good world building for this.
Yes. They found disembodied bodies of the children
Disembodied bodies.
Disemboweled, excuse me.
I want to take a time to thank the people that helped bring this all together. Alex Tudor, you can almost call him our producer at this point. Sarah Tudor, who also helps with some of the technical stuff. I want to take a moment to extend thanks to Eric for letting us use his space to record in, kind of our makeshift studio.
I, in turn, would like to thank Bill for, one, putting up with me and using this camaraderie to do something we both very much love and enjoy doing, and thank Bill's family for allowing him to spend all the time to work and clean up our recordings and present them in what you hear in the final terms, the final edition, if you will.
And I'd like to thank all of you for continuing to listen. I know we've got some loyal followers out there. We do this as a labor of love, but we're happy that there are people that enjoy it hopefully as much as we do.
Thank you very much.